Good afternoon, and welcome to those of you joining this virtual town hall event regarding equity in higher education. My name is Patrick Miller, and on behalf of the Amarillo Branch NAACP, I want to thank our panelists for agreeing to represent their post-secondary institutions today. With that said, let me please properly introduce our guests. We have the 2015 National Teacher of the Year and Dr. John G. O'Brien, Distinguished Chair in Education at West Texas A&M University, Dr. Shanna Peeples. We also have the president of our very own 2021 Top 10 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence finalist at Amarillo College, Dr. Russell Lowery-Hart. Thank y'all for joining us. I will now ask our Religious Affairs Committee Chair, Reverend Damian Miller, to lead us in a brief invocation.
Yes, sir. Lord, we just thank you again for this opportunity, and we thank you for those that have dedicated their lives in service to higher education. We pray today, Lord, that you are just able to bring forth the best of the best, Lord, in all of us, and that we can learn continually together and grow as a community. We thank you for this opportunity. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, cousin and future Dr. Reverend Miller. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping rules. During this proposed hour-long event, there will be a serious discussion regarding equity and inclusion in higher education. Therefore, vulgar and profane language is strictly prohibited. Not that I expect it at all with you all. After a few brief remarks from Dr. Peeples and Dr. Lowery-Hart, I will ask a series of questions. However, there will be time for questions from the executive committee chairs present on this call. If you are joining us by phone, please make sure to remain muted as the background noise may affect the audio of this virtual recording. Now, enough housekeeping. Let's get down to business. Dr. Peeples, would you please share a little bit about yourself and how you became involved with equity in your professional career? After you conclude, Dr. Lowery-Hart will have the floor for the same opportunity.
Thank you so much, Patrick. And I just want to say thank you to everybody on the call and everyone watching for caring about education, which is at the center of my heart. It's at the center of everything that I do. And it's just an honor to speak with you and to be on the same panel with Russell. WT and AC are very close to my heart, and they're the whole reason that I'm sitting here today. I literally got my start at AC and finished at WT. As far as equity goes, in my career, I remember hearing that word as a concept, but I didn't really know exactly what does that mean in practice. And then I had the wonderful students that I had at Horace Mann and then at Paladera High School who helped me see equity that lived and breathed and how it showed up in my classroom and what it meant to teach to the specific child and the specific child's hopes and dreams for what they wanted for themselves. And so much of the equity that I know as far as what should it be comes through my students, and I really owe them a debt of gratitude. I've always thanked them for being the people who were brave enough to tell me, so to speak, when I had broccoli in my teeth, which was a metaphor of saying, Ms. Peeples, you really need to rethink what you just said or did. And so they really helped me to see that equity, in a sense, to borrow Dr. Pedro Noguera's example, was always like, okay, we have this concept of equality that we all know what that means. And in essence, that's like bringing in a huge bin of shoes and saying everybody has shoes. There you go. But equity is making sure that those shoes fit and that they're appropriate for each person and what they want. And I've always found that to be a very easy way for people to understand that when I've talked about it to different audiences. As I've brought that work into higher ed, and particularly to a large system like the Texas A&M system, it's it's challenging to think both in this huge, and I know Russell will have sympathy here, this to think huge at the system level, to think even at a community level, and then to think very granularly down to the classroom level and down to each individual student. Because the work that we do is vitally important. How we make those actions flow through the system determines whether that student will progress, walk across that stage with that credential, and on into the community to benefit all of us. So I'm just going to briefly close there and give Russell the floor. Thank you.
That was a brilliant response. Thank you, Dr. Peeples. Dr. Russell Lowery-Hart.
Well, I think we'd all be better if we could just sit and listen to Shanna for an hour. That
Oh
was,
my gosh.
I,
Poetic.
I think for both of us, equity was rooted in falling in love with our students. And Shanna referenced her students at Horseman. And for me, it was the students that I fell in love with at WT when I was a faculty member and the speech coach there. And I recruited students that represented parts of communities that I think had often been ignored or overlooked or misunderstood or misjudged. Um, and I loved and advocated for them. And one of them I included as a member of my family. And then I started to understand in a really personal way that just like our neighbors of color, my son of color had a completely different lived experience than I did. And so that concept of equity became more personal. And then when we had our two kids after Chris, you could see in really dramatic and painful ways how society looked at them as different people and treated them as such. Then I came to Amarillo College, and Shanna got her start at AC and finished at WT. I got my professional start at WT, and maybe the only person that is finishing at AC that reversed the order. But when I came to Amarillo College, equity meant something incredibly important that I had never considered before. Previously, equity was a goal and it was something that was personal. But when I came to Amarillo College and we started looking at our data and identifying who our core student was, I realized at that point that equity was going to be the source of our college's survival. The majority of our students at Amarillo College are of color. Equity is no longer this political concept. It is rooted in not just serving and saving our community, it's rooted in our own financial survival as an institution. And when the majority of your students are of color and they aren't completing at the same rate as their white counterparts, we could no longer afford to play at equity. Our future depended upon getting it right. And we've made a lot of headway, as many of my colleagues that work at the college and you, Patrick, will know as an officer in our executive committee of the Board of Regents. We have a long ways to go, but we became a top 10 institution in the country, and we'll find out if we're top 5 in May. Because we've closed equity gaps, and we did that rooted in this concept of love. And we fell in love with our students and put structures in place to help them. But I don't know that we ever really knew and understood them. And that's what our next plan, our No Excuses 2025 plan, with our anti-racism work will focus on. And I will say, as a college, as a leader of this college, as a member of this community, I'm so grateful for the leadership that the NAACP has always shown, but in particular this last year in the middle of a pandemic and racial justice crises that finally seem to have captured enough attention to galvanize all people, not just the people of color who have always been fighting for racial justice. You all are leading our community forward, and I'm so honored to follow you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lowery-Hart. If I may say Russell, my dear friend, mentor, brother, uh, whom I'm blessed to serve alongside, as you mentioned, in my capacity as an executive officer of the Amarillo College Board of Regents. You both mentioned students and talked about love, and anyone who's an educator, that's just heartfelt. But you also both talked about just removing barriers and implementing structures which enable students to succeed. And I don't want to neglect your statement, Russell. Thank you for acknowledging what the Amarillo Branch NAACP has done. It's just part of our historic 78 years of service. And service is its own reward, but it is nice to know that people recognize it for what it's worth. And thank you for being right there with us throughout your tenure at Amarillo College, what you did at WT, and throughout your personal life in the community. Dr. Peeples, according to the fall 2020 student profile published by West Texas A&M University, students of color represent approximately 39% of the student body population. Therefore, what services or programs are available to promote equity and inclusion at West Texas A&M University?
Thank you for that, Patrick. And I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Wendler and to Angela Allen, who helped me with this presentation. And I'm really sort of standing in their stead. And if you would indulge me, I have a dreaded PowerPoint to share with. I know that my students groan when this happens, but let me get to this really quickly. It's going to take a minute to start. Okay, and then because I have this fancy setup here. Okay, are you able to see those slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. A lot of what we do is framed around this vision of WT 125. And it's looking at, Russell referenced the plan that AC has. This is the one that WT has taken on to think about serving as a regional university. So serving people here in the 26 counties of the Texas Panhandle. And so when we think about what does equity look like, we're thinking about what does equity look like specifically for the 26 counties of the Texas Panhandle. That's who we serve first. And so a lot of what I'm going to show you is really rooted in that. One of the parts of the plan that is specifically addressing diversity is on page 21, and I'm happy to share like a PDF with you after this call, so folks will have access to it if they want to look through it.
Yeah.
But it's a specific commitment, as you can see, to the diverse needs of the community, looking at what are we offering programmatically, what are we offering as far as services that meet those needs. We're also looking at how we are pushing on what we've done in the past and pushing folks to think more broadly about what we want to be and do and become in the future. And one of the things that makes me proud of this work is at many places you're seeing cuts in these types of programs that look specifically at student support and specifically at increasing the engagement of marginalized students. And I'm really proud that both AC and WT that's not something that you see here. Another thing I'm proud of is that a lot of the WT plan lines up with a global plan that's the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so much of what WT is doing, they call it from the panhandle to the world, lines up with these 17 goals at very specific ways of supporting those communities. Education is, of course, huge in those goals. Angela's work specifically that she shared with me is looking at across the system a leadership project where they're going to look at campus equity, particularly around at-risk students of color and first-gen students. And so this is something that will spread across the system, but will be specifically focused on what are we doing for students here. And that's, looking at kids getting that feedback from those students. She has it set as a sort of toolkit approach that has these 6 specific action steps. And the one I really like at the top, being a teacher, this makes sense to me, is first helping people understand what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what is it not. So what are all the things that we like to call those sorts of initiatives, and what is it really when it's the lived experiences of our students? And so that's one that I really like. And then looking at where are the gaps between what we say we want, where are the gaps between our sort of espoused values or the things we say we care about and what it actually looks like in practice. Another thing that's exciting is looking at a diversity certificate program where students will have to have at least 30 hours to enroll, but it will provide them with this sort of competency for equity. So when they go out and wherever they go to work, they will bring that understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion with them. Specifically in colleges across the campus, one of the things that we've just gotten is a grant to reach out to 7 high schools in Potterandall and Deaf Smith to increase the participation of diverse students. So these are students who are from non-rural, non-ag backgrounds, and help them to be a part of some of the most interesting and cutting edge innovative work in food production and food supply. A couple of others are in the engineering college, looking at increasing the representation of women particularly, and then looking at multicultural literature being added into the fine arts department. And that, to me, it really speaks to me as a former teacher of English language arts. I do believe that diverse books save lives, particularly for marginalized students in the LGBTQ community. And so that is particularly exciting to me. Apologies for the dense text on this slide, but we're getting to the college that I know the most, which is the College of Education and Social Sciences. And just briefly, 2 things that we've had happen recently, and part of why I was thrilled to join the faculty at WT, is we've gotten a grant from the Branch Alliance for Educator Diversity. And that is to specifically focus on recruiting teachers who look like the students that we teach here. I mean, for all the good that I want to say that I did my students, I know that the research supports that students who have Black teachers do better. That's just straight up research. I know that 2 of my most influential teachers were my 7th grade teacher, Ruth Belton, and then it wasn't until I went to my doctoral program that I had Dr. Deborah Jewel Sherman, and she was my 2nd Black teacher. And to me, that's unacceptable. That means that we need to do a much better job of recruiting Black and brown teachers. And so this particular grant looks at how to make that happen. We're going to be piloting some work here very quickly this year to start looking at what works and spread that, of course, across the college, hopefully to help with diverse enrollment across all programs. We know that we're doing a pretty good job as far as preparing teachers. We were just named one of the top elementary programs for teachers, which is really exciting because that's the foundational piece of education for everyone. My work specifically, and one of the things that I've been proud to work with Dr. Henderson, the dean of the college, on, is looking at how we do a better job of supporting the equity competency of faculty. So we're piloting that in our college and looking at ways that we can do a better job of helping all faculty understand equity competence. And then he has allowed me to create a course that was so deeply influential in me in my doctoral program. And it's specifically race, equity, and leadership. So as we are preparing these education leaders to go out of the institution and serve their communities, how have we helped them think about those intersections of race, identity, how that shows up in the educational experiences of the students and the families? And then how does that impact our leadership? So that's really exciting. I'm teaching my first class of that this spring, and hopefully we will be able to branch that class out and also offer some seminars and things where much more people can attend that. Across student experience, we do have some affinity groups that help specific individuals. These are growing, and I'm really happy to see how there's been a concerted push at supporting these student affinity groups. This is something that I know from being a student so recently myself was really important to me. It's one thing to come to college, it's another thing to stay at college. You can get all of the money and support in the world, but if you don't feel like you belong on that campus, it's very hard to get yourself motivated to attend classes. This is something that I also saw with my own students who would get these scholarships, come back from these D1 schools, and talk about how they felt like nobody ever saw them or cared about them. The beauty of a student affinity group is that you do feel like you're welcomed by a group of people who know exactly what it's like to live some of the experiences that you've lived. And so I'm particularly proud of these. And just a couple of final thoughts as we think about, okay, cost, what would that mean for students who maybe want to get an accelerated credential? The online MBA program has really shown success in scaling and making it available to so many people to get this online MBA. I've been really amazed to see the growth of that program. It's actually one of the main drivers of the innovation that we're doing in the online space here. And then my particular program, we're working on online education doctorates, which is really cutting edge. And I'm really happy to see how Dr. Windler has helped us to think about how can we make what we're doing streamlined and affordable enough that students can access these graduate level credentials. He's also asked us to think about what books we choose, what materials we choose. Are we choosing things that our library can make available? How are we making it where students don't have to buy a lot of things that they'll only use maybe one time? And so I've appreciated that push. And then he's asked us as faculty to be very flexible and responsive to student needs. And that's been particularly true over the course of the pandemic. How are we reaching out to students and working with them to make it where they can complete coursework when they've had illnesses and loss of loved ones in their family? And that's particularly impacted some of my students. So I've appreciated the way that we've sort of thought about it in these three buckets. And the final thing that I'll share is Angela, of course, does fantastic work there. She's our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and I have the contact up there for student success. If folks wanted to just ask some more questions and specific questions about cost or programs. And then I would encourage anyone on campus to go by and visit the Neal Multicultural Suite. It's a space that I love. It's very peaceful. It's where you'll also find Angela, and it's just a place that really encourages us to think about communicating across lines of difference. And so I appreciate the opportunity to do this really quick slideshow. Like I said, hope it wasn't too painful for folks to have slides, but I appreciate it, Patrick. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Peoples, wow, outstanding job. Everything you do is exemplary. Thank you for sharing those details. You covered several of my questions, so I hope it doesn't sound redundant when I get to them. But I still want to ask Dr. Lowery-Hart, good luck following Dr. Peoples there. But according to the Amarillo College Fall 2020 report card, students of color represented 58% of the student body population at AC. Therefore, what services or programs are available to promote equity and inclusion at Amarillo College?
Well, one of the things that Shanna mentioned was when you have students of color, that inclusion is an important step in the process to equity. And we've rebuilt our entire college around that concept. Our what we say all the time at Amarillo College is that we're committed to loving the student we have, not the student we used to have, or the student we thought we had, or the student we wished we had, or the student we were, but to actually purposely, systemically fall in love with the student we have. And 58% of our students are of color. We put in our theory of change is really simple, and in the complexity of implementing it, uh, is our culture of caring centered on loving students is about three things. It's about removing a life barrier.
Mhm.
So a lot of our students are working two part-time jobs. They're taking care of their families or raising their own family. And we have to remove any barrier that would keep them from completing their class. And we have Trellis survey data that tells us that our students are an $88 emergency way up from dropping out. And that can be a flat tire. It could be um, uh, a loss of a shift because they're sick for 2 days. But whatever the emergency is, our students are $88 away from leaving the college. So we put in robust structures, social service structures, emergency aid structures, and academic support structures to ensure that our students never had to choose between the financial crisis they may be facing and the education they know is going to change their financial pathway. So we have social workers. We have a lot of resources in this community to solve a lot of the social service barriers. But the misnomer is that people that need them know where they are, how to access them, and use them. And the reality is, so few of our students, because they are working two part-time jobs that aren't paying a living wage, don't realize they qualify for support. And so that's where the social workers come in. It's where the emergency aid comes in. And it's where our CARES Act funds have come in to really shore up whatever financial catastrophe our students are living in. So that's the first theory of change, removing a life barrier. The second one is to accelerate our students' learning. And we call our typical student Maria. The majority of our students here are women. The majority of our students are women of color that are raising 1.2 kids and working two jobs. So because Maria is working two jobs and has some financial barriers that we're trying to solve for her, she can't spend 6 to 8 to 9 to 10 years to get a degree. So we have embraced a concept of accelerated learning through 8-week classes that allow Maria to actually finish in 2 to 3 years and then transition into WT with credits that align to a degree plan. That acceleration is really built on three things: 8-week classes, required tutoring that's in every one of our classes with triggers that are free. So students If students are struggling, their faculty will say, you got to go to the tutoring center that's available online or in person, even in a pandemic. And that's had a tremendous impact. And then the third thing that we've done as a college that's gotten a lot of national attention is that we have just killed developmental education. Um, we don't, our students are capable, but we so often end up telling them that they're not, and then reinforcing their perception that they're not by inflicting tests on them like TSIs and SATs and ACTs that are truly culturally insensitive and aren't aligned to an academic pathway. Success on an ACT does not predict success in completing with a college or degree. And but you know what does? Persistence, connection with a faculty member, accessing services that lead to your academic learning and support. So we're accelerating learning, and killing DevEd has allowed us to put students immediately into 4-credit classes. And if they need extra academic support, we're placing those people and those supports inside the class, sitting alongside them. It's worked really well. We've reduced time to degree by 3 semesters for students that normally would have spent a year to a year and a half in developmental math before they could ever take a class that gave them credit. And by that time, they've drained their financial aid, they've used all their scholarships. So it's a game changer for a lot of our students. So removing a life barrier in an accelerated learning environment. And that third piece is a culture of caring where our students feel seen, heard, and loved. And that is particularly important for our next strategic plan because equity is one of our 5 goals. Within the equity goal is to be an anti-racist institution. And that requires that we know and love our students, that we see them, that we privilege their voice, and that we listen to them. And at Amarillo College, listening to our students is the centerpiece of our transformation. They've written our values. We use secret shoppers to help us understand the student experience and how we can refine it to shape it for them instead of for us. But there are several things in that anti-racism approach that are going to challenge the college and I think the community in really important and powerful ways. One is that we have established an anti-racism team that is working with this book and the 3 authors of the book called Language of Healing. We have got to learn how to talk about racial justice as a college, as faculty, as citizens of this community. And the anti-racism team is grappling with trainings and structures that can help us talk about racial justice. Then that same team will be evaluating every policy and procedure that we have in place to find the implicit bias that seem to exist in our organization and most organizations. We have a common reader program for all of our faculty and staff. The common reader this year is Just Mercy, which is completely about racial justice. And then all full-time employees, all 612 full-time employees at the college have just completed 3 hours of implicit bias training. And then we'll be required by the end of this year to complete another 3 hours of implicit bias training. Those are not going to solve the issue. But we, as a college, have got to build a foundation on which we can talk about issues of race and racial justice, where we can honestly look at our data. And you can look at our data and know that we've closed equity gaps, one of the few colleges in the country to do that. And look at our data during a pandemic and know that when the country saw 19% of its Black men leave higher education, we actually increased our enrollment of Black men. And look at the success rates. The highest category of success for our student demographics are Black women. Yet in the pandemic, they were the ones that struggled the most at Amarillo College. And so unpacking that, understanding it, and building structures around it are really important. But before we can build those structures, I think we have to know and understand ourselves, look at our data and know that our students, the majority of our students are of color, but the overwhelming majority of our employees at the college look like me. They're white, which tells me that we have a foundation of implicit bias in our employee base and our hiring processes, and particularly in our academic programs where our faculty reside. So that's what our focus will be over the next 3 years, engaging every employee in conversations about race, racial justice, self-analysis with implicit bias training, and then rebuilding our policies and structures to hire employees that reflect our student body.
Thank you, Dr. Lowery-Hart, for that extensive overview of the things that are best practice solutions for addressing the concerns that we have regarding equity at AC and in higher education in general. I definitely appreciate you sharing Maria. She is our student and we are blessed to serve her. I want to go back to something Dr. Peeples mentioned. I'm having to navigate outside of my questions because you both answered them very well in your thorough answers. But with culturally responsive teaching and the acquisition of textbooks and resources that are implemented in the classroom, what have you seen as the immediate effects on the students' engagement and the professors' tendency to have a full comprehension of the diversity of the students represented in the WT classroom? I just want to get your response, Dr. Peeples.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Patrick. That's asked like a true teacher. I so much of the way I frame this question is owes a lot of thanks and gratitude to a Black female academic named Dr. Rudine Bishop. And she gave us this concept of windows and mirrors. And she's since sort of amended it to say sliding glass doors too. And she talks about this sense of being able to see your own experience represented on the page, as a way of being a mirror, of course. But then how are we centering other things like, for example, Black joy? Are we only putting in materials that center like oppression narratives or depressive narratives?
Yeah.
How are we showing people going beyond these sort of static and tired and frankly oppressive narratives that we're putting in front of students? Something that's been particularly stunning to me is coming back and working with the doctoral students that I'm working with is, again, and Russell alluded to this, I do have some students of color, but what they've shared with me confidentially through some of their narratives of their experience is still they're the only coming in. And so I've had to be very conscious of what am I putting in front of them that supports who they are and also the work that they want to do. So I've had to really think about when I bring in a book, am I bringing in a book that is great for me, or am I bringing in a book that looks at specific intersections of someone's identity? And so we've done a tremendous amount of identity work, of looking at how do all of these sort of experiences make up a form of sort of rings inside a tree trunk that affect who we are. And so I think it's very critical that the text that we choose, the materials that we choose, the videos that we have students watch, and to ask ourselves, are we showing a complete picture to students? Are we only showing these sort of like old, here's all these really sad and despairing narratives? Are we showing these like possibilities that also take into account this is who you are as a person?
Absolutely. Thank you for that response. Dr. Lowery-Hart, you had mentioned how the pandemic has greatly impacted the lives of the students you serve. And I just want to, take you back to last spring, when I know you're gonna get mad at me for bringing it up, but you were just out there bravely weathering the elements and outside of your office, outside of your comfort zone, and just sitting in the middle of the Ware Student Commons, helping with the student technology checkout. It was well recognized and received overwhelmingly positive responses from our regents, from cabinet, and for students and employees at AC. So just kind of talk about that experience and what that demonstrated to you and made you aware of with regard to lack of broadband access and lack of equity with regard to uh, technology and academic support in Amarillo.
Well, you remember when, really a year ago, we started having some kind of conversations about this thing, this pandemic. What was it? Oh, it's in China. It's not here. What are we going to do? And then, uh, and then almost within days, we started talking about what triggers shutdowns. And so I just remember in the beginning, Patrick, there was so much uncertainty and fear around the pandemic. And could you get it on by touching a surface? There was so much we didn't know. And at the college, I wanted to double down on what we did know. Um, we knew we had to protect our students, but we knew that if we shut everything down completely, that we would be cutting students off of a lifeline that they might not ever recover from. And so we kept the Ware Student Commons open. It's a 5-floor building that has our largest computer lab. It has our food pantry. It has our tutoring services in it, and our library. And so I told students that no matter what happens, you have a place that you can come get help. And it started out with just giving them checking out laptops and helping them log in to their class because they've only taken face-to-face classes and now they're in this blackboard hell that they didn't understand, and guiding students through that with some of my colleagues who were brave enough to support this effort. Um, but what it turned into was a reminder that even in a pandemic, we need each other. And sometimes that means you physically have to uh, be in presence of other people. You have to access food. You have to have the comfort of seeing a person and seeing them understand what your challenges were. And that work at the Ware Student Commons moved well beyond just technology, although that was a core issue for our students, and moved into a deeper work of using food, technology, tutoring, advising, and access to library as a source of social support students were feeling because they were so isolated. One of the things that we learned about our students is that our students thought they had access to broadband. And we had survey results that told us they did. But what I learned firsthand is that they thought this was their access to broadband. They were completing their classes on a phone. That isn't sustainable. Or they had broadband access in their house and they had a computer, but they also had 2 kids and a partner that were doing their schools on one computer and doing 3 jobs on that one computer. And it was not sustainable. So we had to, even in a pandemic, keep spaces open in a safe manner. And I will say in the beginning, my fingers were raw. I thought I was removing my fingerprints. I cleaned everything with Clorox bleach every 15 minutes. My fingers were wrinkled. But as we learned more about the pandemic and the science behind the responses to it, we were able to respond appropriately. And our fears went from fear of this disease, this virus, to a fear of losing our neighbors to the virus, but losing them to dropping out, to financial not having a financial future. And so we had to figure out a way to navigate the fear of the pandemic in ways that helped us ensure that we didn't lose people even in a pandemic.
Having that, revealed to you, I'm certain that it was difficult, but also maybe even inspiring in a way, because
Completely.
it helps submit, the foundation, which we're scaffolding from, and growing and increasing our ability to relate and respond to the students that we serve. So thank you, Dr.
Can I just
Lowery-Hart.
say one thing about that, Patrick? What I learned the most is that our students are resilient,
Mm.
but I was moved every day by how they were taking care of each other. Students that weren't in classes with each other, that were meeting in the Ware Student Commons, were taking care of each other's kids while one took a test. It was I saw the best of our community in action, and I think the pandemic has only revealed the best of who we are as a community.
We can only hope that it's sustainable. And I think the Panhandle, people of the Panhandle possess a spirit of resilience, which was on full display back last spring into now. And despite these challenges that we face, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board still has a goal of achieving 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 will have a college degree or certificate by the year 2030. What does Amarillo College have to do to ensure that this goal is achieved?
Well, it's going to be a hard goal to achieve, but I know they hate when people ask me this question because my first response is the goal's not aggressive enough. Um, we need a higher goal and we need a more aggressive timeline. And to reach those goals, we can't play within the structures that exist. We have to reimagine and rebuild new structures. And I think a large part of my frustration in the education sector is that innovation is playing around the margins of protecting the very corpus of who we already are. And who we already are has been, for decades and centuries, systemically exclusionary for students of color. And so we've got to rebuild ourselves with the community a part of that reimagination. For us, that means rethinking when and how we deliver classes. And we're getting ready to announce in the next 3 to 6 months a night nursing program. It's those kinds of things that we're going to have to do to provide education when and where our students need it, rather than spending the millions of dollars that we do in higher education trying to train our students to adapt to us.
I think that speaks well to your understanding and your belief in what you say, and that we must, serve the students that we have, not the students we wish we had. Dr. Peeples, same question to you. What does WTAMU have to do to achieve the goal set by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board?
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate the way that Russell framed that up. It's certainly my belief, and it speaks to this sense of um, having to do adaptive work as leaders, as institutions, and not relying on these technical sort of, okay, we have this plan. Here's this technical thing that we're going to do to, input X and Y and get output Z. And there you go, equity. I think by way of answering it, it would be that I think WT is committed to being really adaptive as an institution and putting students at the center. And when I talk about that, I mean putting in marginalized students and really considering the students at the margins. When we do that, the beauty is, and you know this, everybody on this call knows this, when you serve the folks at the margin, you're meeting the needs of everybody. And so it's actually really smart. It's the most efficient way to deliver services and programs. And so I really, I've appreciated the chance to work with Angela and think about how are we going to do a better job of connecting across all of these different communities and affinity groups, and how are we going to keep this conversation going and moving forward. So, you know, beyond those specific things, I would say that WT is committed to, like I said, this adaptive sense of putting students right at the center of every single thing that we do.
A student-centered focus. That seems responsive and adaptive. This concludes my series of questions. I don't know if if we have any questions from our second vice president, Melody Graves, or Chairman Glover, Treasurer Powell, Chairman Damian Miller, or even Chairwoman Amy Taylor, but feel free.
We have 3 questions up. First question from Damian Miller.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. First of all, just want to say, as an Amarillo College graduate back in 2011, thank you guys so much. I tell you what, it's a fantastic school, and my daughter's at AC right now, and so she loves it. So you guys are doing an excellent job. My question is there is another margin that isn't always talked about, but for those like myself many years ago who were formerly incarcerated, or those that are maybe looking to turn their life around, what are some of the programs and strides that maybe AC and even WT have maybe implemented to help with the recidivism rate? Because one of the things that you know, at least myself, I'm very adamant about is that the other half.
Damien, we lost you, so I'm going to jump in because I think you offer an incredibly important conversation, and I'm just going to queue up Mel. So get ready, Mel. First of all, I'm so glad that your daughter is having a good experience. My son is a freshman at Amarillo College right now, and he's having a great experience too. Being someone who has witnessed a family member who was incarcerated struggle to find a job after she paid her debt to society, I know it's critically important that we are thoughtful about connecting our neighbors to pathways that lead to a family sustaining wage. We have several pathways at Amarillo College, but all of those pathways start with the same conversation with the superhero Melody Graves. So I'll let Melody kind of talk through how Amarillo College approaches that work.
Thank you, Russell. At Amarillo College, I serve as the Justice Involved Advocate. And so my name and contact information appear in all of the syllabi. And basically in that role, what I do is I meet with people that have a criminal background, and we talk about, first of all, I encourage them, because a lot of them come to me and they are broken and they feel like the world has given up on them. And so I kind of give them a lifeline, and we put it in context. Okay, you made a mistake, but you still have people who are depending on you. So how do we get past that? And once we do that, we have conversations, open conversations. We talk about their parole. We talk about what it means, but then we talk about how you can still make an impact in the world. And so, yes, there are different majors that they can't do just because of the nature of the way society is and how it deals with people with criminal backgrounds. But there is a variety of things that they can do. And so those are the things that we focus on. In addition to that, I provide them with resources. I've had some students that have a background that still want to be nurses. So I guide them through the process of doing their declaratory order with the nursing board. We've gone through the dental board, all of those things. I just serve kind of as an advocate for them to say that, okay, you made a mistake, but here's where we need to go. We still need you to get an education. We still need you to be a role model for your kids. We still want you to be part of society and be proud of who you are. And so with that, I've been doing that role probably for 6 years. And so now after speaking with VP Dr. Clunis, we are going to start offering more services that way. So I always felt like every time somebody came in, I was just reinventing the wheel with them. But now we're going to streamline those services. I want to develop a handbook for them that includes information that they'll need. I'm subscribing to a couple of journals that will help me. What I found was I thought this was just something that Amarillo College was doing, but they have a journal dedicated to helping students get back into academics after they've been incarcerated. So making those kind of connections, and then using the students who I have who make it through successfully to be role models for the other students, keeping in touch with them. I keep in touch with most of them. I give them my cell phone number, and I have a network of people in the community that can help them with various things. So I think that's one of the things that we are doing at AC. It's been working wonderfully. And with me being the first point of contact, I get to touch them. And so I get to pour into them the encouragement that somebody poured into me one day, and let them know that no matter what has happened, you still have an opportunity to take care of your family and to be a productive part of society. Thank you, guys.
And our next question up is from Amy Taylor, Vice President, or no, I'm sorry, that was last year, Executive Board Member.
Oh, yes. Thank you. This is a comment and a question. Most of the time when we talk about equity, we're talking about racial equity, but I would like to throw gender into the mix. Over the last several days, I've been reading through the 100 plus applications for scholarships to Los Barrios. And I have noticed that about 76% of the applications are from young women. And this has been so every year, but the gap has gotten wider and wider. Is this gap reflected at Amarillo College and at WT? And at what level do we need to start reaching to the young minority boys to close this gap? Thank you.
I'll jump in and let Shanna save me from this question. I lose sleep over this question. 67% of our students at Amarillo College are women. The overwhelming majority of them are women of color. We have a crisis in boys in our community. And I wish I could say it was just our community, but if you look at the enrollment data across the country, it's more severe at Amarillo College, but it's over a 60. And I have my own personal theories about that, having watched my son and my daughter go through a school system that I think rewards being good at the game of school as much as it rewards learning. And I've seen my son blossom at Amarillo College in classes that allow for hands-on applied project-based learning that engages him in a way that he wasn't always engaged. And so I think we've got to change the way we teach and the way we learn to be more inclusive with different needs of learners. And it's not just adding a pathway to technical degrees, as important as they are. This isn't an issue of we just don't have enough boys in truck driving. It is a systemic issue that is as oppressive as many of the systemic issues that have color. And we're going to pay a heavy price for it if we can't figure it out and figure it out quickly. At Amarillo College, we're trying, like the 8-week classes has had a tremendous impact on our men and their success rates. There's something about acceleration that has particularly helped our men and our men of color in particular, and having a mentor and a relational person calling and checking on has had a bigger impact on our men of color, particularly our Black men of color. As we got to scale it and figure it out, but I don't have a great answer.
I appreciate your question, Amy, and it's a deeply personal question to me, obviously, and also as the mother of daughters. And one of the things that we know broadly from research and learning and educational attainment is that when you educate a woman anywhere in the world, you immediately boost the quality of the community. And that is why, even at the federal level, the Obama administration had a program called Teaching Women English that we actually invested in women all around the world to teach them sort of English and entrepreneurial skills at the same time, because we knew that that lowered violence. We knew that it lowered incidences of, even terroristic behavior. It lowered incidences of domestic violence and addiction rates. One of the things that I saw, just was blessed to see in my travels, was in Peru, where there was a village that when they invested in the women in the village in their education, they saw drastic drops in all of those same indicators that I talked about. In my own life, deeply personally, I would believe that Amarillo College and education there saved my mother's life. It saved her from an abusive relationship. So to me, helping more girls to understand that education isn't a nice to have anymore, it's a need to have. It literally is the way that you save your family, but it's also the way that you do your part to add to the common good of your community here. We make it better by intentionally focusing on educational attainment of all our folks, but especially our women. And so, yes, I very much appreciate that question. And I also just want to come back to something that Melody shared. It was just really touched my heart when you talked about incarcerated folks. I taught incarcerated youth through the Flex program at Paladuro, and I've had family members too who have had to deal with the shame and the problems and the prejudices coming out of a system and trying to do better. And so I really appreciate that. I think that as far as for WT, I think we can learn from what y'all are doing and hopefully, strengthen that partnership even more to serve those folks as well.
Okay, and next question up is actually from myself. And I want to throw into, my daughter's currently at Amarillo College, and it's not understating it to say that it's been life-changing and a real lifeline. So, and of course, Melody's a big part of that too. So, but my question, and it ties together several different things that we've talked about today. We've talked about the pandemic, and we've talked about implicit bias and things like that. What I'd like to talk about is, or ask a question about, is remote learning is not going to go away. It's been brought to the fore because of the pandemic, but it's certainly a big part of programs both at WT and at AC. But there are one of the problems with implicit bias is unstated assumptions about what's normal or what can be expected, and there's also a difficulty in taking something that's been face-to-face and turning it remote and knowing what things need to change. So I'm just, as a thought experiment here, I'm not talking about this specific issue, but just as an example of the kind of things to think about. If you have a student who has children at home that they're caring for and needs to be in a class, and they maybe might have been able to take advantage of childcare if it had been face-to-face, but because of the pandemic, they're home, they're on a Zoom meeting. And the class itself has a requirement that you can't turn off the camera or you count it absent. Just as an example of a kind of thing that might be a barrier for some students, or they're in a multi-generational household and there's some things, I need to turn it off because something in the background that I don't want to share, or some things like that. There's these things, and I only want to use that example. I don't want to narrow it to that one example, but how can we take some of these principles and bring them down into the classroom as expectations about how the class will be run to be more inclusive, down to the, just the details of day to day, and still provide enough flexibility to our teachers to do what they need to do. And I'd like to leave that open to both of you, but maybe throw that to Dr. Russell Lowery-Hart first, just as how do we balance those things and communicate those things?
Well, I appreciate the question because I think it's a one that we're all struggling with. And there is no right answer to that question, and there's no easy answer to that question. I'll just say at the college, everything we do is rooted in loving our student and knowing her and privileging her voice and understanding what she needs. There have been things like poverty training, implicit bias training that have helped us have a more robust understanding of who Maria is so that we can respond appropriately. The values that Maria has written for the college are all about service and relationship. And so those are a lot of the mistakes I think we make in education is we think that our work is one initiative away from fixing something. And initiatives are important, but it's really the culture of your organization and how you envelop your peers and your students. And so I would guess that students have had a lot of experiences of being loved and appreciated and supported, and they've had experiences that where they may be in isolation and the professor's like, you got to turn your camera on or you're absent. I hope it's the latter more than, I hope it's the former more than the latter. But I think if we know our students, we train faculty in equitable understanding of who she is and give them professional development and skills to understand how to use those tools in response to who our students are, that we can make anything magical, whether it is face-to-face or online. So I don't know that it is a solution or an intervention. I think it is a cultural response to loving your students. And if love is the foundation of what you're doing in your classroom, then it's not just that we would allow you to turn your camera off so you can learn while you're taking care of your kids. It would be inviting your kids into the learning experience and introducing who they are and welcoming them in the classroom, not just the Zoom classroom. And I know that's happening all over the college. I think, but I also know that there are those experiences that are happening as well, where we have faculty that are nervous about the transition and therefore rules become more important than people. And that's what we're all trying to fight, I think.
I really appreciate that answer. It reminds me of my student, Kelly Palmachon, who said to me this wonderful thing. She said, I love being here because it feels like there's love before curriculum. And that became sort of my mission statement is, am I doing love before curriculum? So really echoing what Russell said. And I think when you think of it that way, you understand that curriculum's always going to be there. The person, they may not. And I think if anything has happened in the pandemic, it's shown us that people are the precious resource. It's not the words on the page. It's not even the credential. It's the person. And so I could get really passionate about this because it's something I've always hated is that, we don't reach out with our students and we don't co-create the learning experience with our students. I don't know that that's so much the case at AC. I know it's not at AC because when I was a student there, I had a professor let me do my final in French from my hospital bed where I just had my daughter. So I know how flexible can be. And because I've had those kinds of teachers and professors, it's sort of helped me to spread that message and conceive of how, when I work with teacher candidates or administrators, getting them to think that way, of thinking love before curriculum.
Mm. Wow. I think that we have reached a point at which we may end with that message of love before curriculum and love as the foundation. We are just so thrilled that you were able to join us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Peeples. Thank you, Dr. Lowery-Hart, for both of your efforts and all of your concerted endeavors to ensure that we are making the most out of higher education. And just we appreciate your leadership throughout our community. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you to the executive committee members of the Amarillo Branch NAACP who spared some of their time to join us this afternoon. This has been a recorded session that will be posted later on our social media. So feel free to tune in to view it. The Amarillo Branch NAACP is 78 years old this year, and we are supported by people like you. The Amarillo Branch NAACP remains an all-inclusive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. To find out how you can become a member or support any of our endeavors, please visit www.amarillonaacp.org or find us on Facebook or Twitter. May God bless you all. Have a wonderful and blessed weekend.